Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the February 23rd Bellingham City Council Standing Committee meetings. The first committee that we have on tap is Public Works and Public Safety, and in Terry Borneman's excused absence, Roxanne Murphy is the chair.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the lovely Public Works and Public Safety Committee. I am joined by fellow committee member Michael Lilliquist, and Jack Weiss is filling in for Terry's absence. So we have two items today. The first is near and dear to my heart. It's an interlocal agreement between the City of Bellingham and the Whatcom Council of Governments to help fund the Whatcom Smart Trips program. So Ted Carlson, could you take it away?
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you. Ted Carlson, Public Works Department. Before you is the annual agreement between the City and the Council of Governments to fund the City's portion of the Smart Trips program. And Smart Trips is the COG's educational and incentive program to support mode shift, alternative transportation options, transit, bicycling, and walking. It's a relationship that the city's had with the Council of Governments for several years. We talked a little bit about it during the budget process this last budget cycle, and the money is included in the 2015 budget. It is allocated across the city, so it's not necessarily a street fund cost. It's a cost that's spread out amongst all the funds, kind of a non-departmental cost center. So it is spread out because all of the city employees and residents benefit from the Smart Trip program, have access to Smart Trips and all the programs that come along with that. We recommend approval. There is a change in the budget for this year. It's the same for the city, the $25,000. Several years ago, that number was at $100,000. So we have reduced the city's direct funding of this program over the years for budgetary reasons. But you'll see if you go to the budget that's laid out in your packet, there is a new funding source, which is the federal. It's federal funding.
Page 54.
Yes, page 54. Thank you, Gene. And you'll see just under $200,000 of federal funding. That is something that the COG, actually $93,000, it's identified as U.S. DOT federal highway money. That's money that comes through WSDOT to the COG in their role as the Regional Transportation Planning Organization. Money that historically has been used for capital projects. The COG policy group, the technical committee makes recommendations to the policy groups on what regional transportation projects should be funded with that money. Over the years, the Smart Trips program has relied heavily on other state and federal grants, which have gone away. And in an effort to keep the program fully funded, the policy group within the COG approved directing some of the what's called the Surface Transportation money, the federal highways money, to fund the Smart Trips program, and that's at that $93,000. The total program is around $250,000. That's decreased significantly from what it was in the past, so they have tried to size the program to be able to provide that within the decreasing budget that they're seeing, largely from reduced state and federal grants. So that's the program. There's some 2014 highlights in your packet, as well as a work plan for 2015. Staff recommends approval of the interlocal.
Committee members, Councilmember Lilliquist.
Thanks, Roxanne. I really appreciate the Smart Trips program, and I'm going to support this small amount of funding towards the program, but I'd like to ask some questions first. With regard to the emergency ride home program, I was talking with someone this weekend, and they really appreciated that. I wasn't aware of this program. If I understand correctly, if you take, say, the bus in, but you have an emergency, you need to get home, get your kid to the doctor, there's an emergency ride service available. But it says here it's funded separately. Can you tell me a little bit more about that program and how it is funded?
That's coming out of, I don't know the specifics of that. I don't know whether that's from, when you look at the budget, you see that there's a portion of money that's just identified as COG funding, and I don't know if that's the distribution funding that all the cities pay into, or whether they have a separate grant to fund that. But you're right about the program. That's exactly what the program's intended to do, is when things come up for folks that have either taken transit or ridden their bike to work and they're not able to return home that same way, they can work through the COG to get a taxi or emergency ride home. So it is a program that does help that people feel more comfortable not having their vehicle at work. So it's a great program, but I don't know the specifics of how it's funded. Well, but I'll find out and email that out to the council.
Yeah, it's just in parentheses here, funded separately. I didn't know what that meant. Can I continue with one more question? I really appreciate, again, what the program is doing, but I'm wondering how effectiveness is measured with the program. For example, the majority of the budget is really on the personnel and the programs, the promoting, the education, not on the incentives that are offered. I suppose that's because a lot of the little gifts and incentives are actually partially donated by area businesses, for example. But, I mean, what is the evidence of how effective the incentives work? I use myself as an example. I'm a member of Smart Trips. I used to log my trips, but frankly, I'll take the bus. I took the bus in today. I'll take the bus, but I just don't want to do the hassle of logging a trip, even if it means I may get a discount at the end. So how does Smart Trips know about the effectiveness of their incentives or the effectiveness of their education in terms of changing people's behavior and letting them know what they can do?
It's a good question, because that is something that they see. Folks that are certainly participating in the program have not always continued to log their trips, and it's understandable. They rely on survey data. So in the past, they've contracted with third parties to do detailed survey work. It's somewhat expensive, but they've used the results of that to track success based on, whether it was related to the options that were available to people, the level of transit service, or the completeness of the sidewalk network or bicycle network, or the incentives themselves. That's not in the budget for the coming year. As I said, it's fairly expensive work. They also use census data. It's difficult to necessarily attribute any change in mode shift directly to this program, but I think that they're relying on the data showing that trips, or single occupancy vehicle trips, are down, that the education component of alternative transportation is important. The city obviously works on the capital side of that as well in terms of completing the network, and they go hand in hand, but that's always the challenge, is measuring the effectiveness of the program. And I think surveys have been the primary way of doing that, as well as working with the businesses that are part of the program and getting information from them. We also do commute trip reduction through the COG, and larger employees that are responsible for having a commute trip reduction program. We send out our own surveys. So to the city of Bellingham as an employer, we send out surveys to all of our employees asking them about their commute habits. We can compile that information. It goes not only to the COG, but also to the DOT, and all of the larger businesses in the city do that. And so that's another form of, how effective has the program been.
Mayor Kelly.
Just to add a couple things, and Roxanne, I'm sure, has heard this too. One of the reasons we think the program is more effective is because we don't need incentives to get people to do things. Now, as with you, it's just become the thing you do, which is really important. And I think the other part for me is the education program that happens in the schools. How kids ride the bus, how they safely ride their bikes. That's also an important part that I think is something that is good introduced earlier rather than later. And we're going to continue to look at the policy of the Smart Trips program to make sure that the money is being spent where we're getting the best bang for our buck. And I have to admit that the cuts to the program have been, as someone who supported it at the state level, have been pretty brutal. I mean, they're significant. And so we want to just make sure that the money we're investing, we're putting in places that actually make a difference. So I think your questions were well asked, and I feel confident that the amount of money we're contributing to this program is well worth it.
Council members, any questions? Love to entertain a motion.
Yes.
I would move that we recommend authorizing the contract for this interlocal agreement between Bellingham and the Council of Governments.
Okay, we have a motion to authorize the contract, the interlocal agreement between the City of Bellingham and the Wacom Council of Governments. Any other feedback, Councilmember?
Thank you, Roxanne. Last fall, I voted against establishing the $25,000 to Smart Trips as part of our city budget. The reasons I did so at the time, I don't need to go and, I think, elaborate on them again, but I didn't feel as though it was an effective use of more money. I thought that providing more capital improvements in our own infrastructure was a better source. I mean, I look at some of the things that we've done with bike and ped facilities. Once we built them, that how many people go and use them. I travel down Northwest Avenue quite a bit, and once those bike lanes went in there, the number of bicyclists that used them has gone up exponentially. It's just amazing. It's like, Squalicum Creek Park. We put in the park, we open it up, and all of a sudden there's hundreds and hundreds of people using it every day. It's when you put the facilities in that I think really drives much more of the use than the educational component of it. I don't want to go and downplay the educational part of it, but I think for the city's part of it, I believe that we have more of a role to play in actually building the facilities than we do providing this effort that Smart Trips does. I mean, I look, this happened a couple months ago, but in one issue of the Cascadia Weekly, there's 3 full-page ads in there. I don't see the effectiveness of this type of promotion. All of that in just one issue during the holiday time when, admittedly, there might not be as many people reading that publication during the holiday time. I'm really uncomfortable with the way that the money is spent and the philosophy behind the educational component whenever they are saying that it's better to go and fund them through education and through this promotion part of it than it will be to actually build the bike and ped facilities themselves. I would hope that we really look at this very closely for the next budget year. I mean, I voted against the budget last year. I will be very curious as to our supplemental budget this coming fall for this program, but I don't know. I do not want to support this contract.
Any other feedback? Well, I'll just say that when I moved to Bellingham, I really questioned whether I could do a thing called Bike to Work when I lived in the lettered streets and worked in Deming. And through the Smart Trips outreach and the advocacy for Bike to Work, it taught me that I could. And so every time I do that, I'm helping out our environment so substantially. I only share this story because I conveyed that to the Smart Trips program, and they said they hear stories like this all of the time. So I just hope that continual support for cycling and alternative modes of transportation through education and through facilities will help create a better society. So we have a motion on the table. Mayor Linville, sorry.
Yeah, and I just want to follow up on what Jack said, because he did share those ads with me. And we have had serious conversations about some of the publications and that type of thing that Smart Trips have produced. And I think there's still an opportunity to focus in on what we think is actually the most effective thing, as I said, with the school education and whatever. It's something our community supports, and we need to figure out what our support is actually going to buy. So I appreciate Jack's comments, and the actual amount of funding has been significantly reduced, but that's a good conversation to have during our budget discussions.
Okay, the motion on the table is the interlocal agreement between the City of Bellingham and the Whatcom Council of Governments to help fund the Whatcom Smart Trips program. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed?
Opposed.
Okay, this goes forward with the mixed recommendation tonight at our full council meeting. Our second item is a project update, upcoming closure of Chestnut Bay Bridge, project ER 0013. And Ted, could you please fill us in, since some of us are a little new to this?
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. This is an information item only. We will be coming to hopefully your next council meeting with a recommendation to award bid on this project. But because this project involves a full closure of the Bay Chestnut Bridge, we wanted to take the opportunity to go over the project in some detail, highlight some of the aspects of the project, including the duration, the proposed detour, and what we hope to accomplish with the project. Fundamentally, what this project will do is remove the weight restriction on the Bay Chestnut Bridge. That is a key component of our truck route, so it's very problematic to have a weight restriction on a truck route. Currently, trucks coming from that portion of the area hopeful to go down the Rotor Squalicum truck route have to take the detour that you're going to see now. So there's some very key advantages to this rehabilitation project. I'm going to turn it over to Steve Day. He's the project engineer on this bridge rehabilitation, and he's going to walk you through some of the key points and a little bit of a project update. So go ahead, Steve.
Good afternoon, council members. Steve Day, Public Works. As you know, as Ted just explained, we are working on a project that's currently out to bid. We're expecting a council award to rehabilitate the Chestnut Bay Bridge. Just want to give a quick overview here of where we're talking about in town. As you may know, the Chestnut Bay intersection is over the railroad tracks. I'm going to zoom in here. Our project work occurs right here on the bridge. The bridge is outlined in red. The orange zones are street improvements associated with each approach of the bridge. The bridge was built in 1928, and the whole facility is actually a combination of two bridges. The blue in this photo here is the Rotor Avenue South Connector, built in 1987. Our project scope will really be occupying this L-shaped red and orange section, but just to give you a general layout of what we got. The project will tie into the future extension and waterfront development, not part of the project, but certainly in proximity to the work that's going on down in the waterfront. The project itself combines aspects of various downtown and development plans regarding the Old Town District, the Downtown District, and the waterfront development area. Here's our proposed detour plan. As you can see, the current proposal for the project is that the bridge will be fully closed for a duration of up to 6 months. This closure was approved by council last year. As part of that, the detour will impact traffic quite significantly throughout the zone. In blue here is our essentially southbound Rotor traffic flow. Up, it will detour at F Street, Hawley, Champion, Magnolia to Commercial. And then southbound traffic on Hawley, or I'm sorry, excuse me, northbound traffic on Hawley if there were minor amounts of traffic on Chestnut, will be detoured over to Hawley and then back to F. Our pedestrian route will be detoured at Central, Hawley, and Commercial to get around the bridge closure. Also, as part of the project, during construction, we're proposing some temporary pedestrian safety improvements at Champion and Hawley due to that left turn motion shown in blue here. Excuse me. Here's a blow up of that intersection. You'll see essentially what we're proposing to do is to remove the current pedestrian crossing at Champion Street to allow a little less vehicular pedestrian interaction here at turning left from Hawley onto Champion. The primary reason for the bridge rehabilitation project is to remove load postings. Even though it is part of our truck route, the bridge has been posted since the mid-2000s to limit oversized and overloaded trucks from using this route. So the completion of this project will reestablish that truck route, provide future connectivity for trucks to and from the waterfront. A full bridge closure allows us to move forward and minimize the duration of traffic impacts and construction impacts to the surrounding areas. A quick view of our channelization plan for the final condition. As part of the project, we are including a new bicycle climbing lane up the Rotor, up from Rotor to provide connectivity, as well as then marked bicycle sharrows in the vicinity of Bay Street and a new downhill lane further up. This lane that's shown here will continue down Rotor Avenue and then mate up with the lanes that are on Central, or I'm sorry, on Rotor, starting north of Central. These recommendations and implementations are in accordance with the current bicycle master plan adopted last year. And finally, one of the items that will probably be noticed, will be an installation of a throw fence over the railroad tracks. And this installation was a requirement in coordination with BNSF and to allow the project to and access to the right-of-way over the tracks. This slide represents a view of what the throw fence will look like. This elevated throw fence will sit behind the existing rail along the water side of the bridge and then within the crux of this intersection. This particular one here will be hidden from view and lower, so you'll see basically throw fence at 2 locations. So that's the basics of the project. I've gone over it fairly quickly, but we wanted to make sure council was aware that this was coming up and that we will be awarding bids hopefully in March and moving forward with construction. I welcome questions if you have any.
Committee members, Councilmember Lillquist.
Thanks, Roxanne. Steve, thanks for the presentation. If I recall correctly, there was originally thinking that we might have to do more extensive work on this, but we discovered that if we put in a reinforced and strengthened deck, that would actually create the strength and the load rating we needed, and that was a cheaper way of going. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, that's correct. Originally, when the weight restriction was first implemented, I think the most conservative thought was that the bridge would have to be rebuilt at some day at a much larger price tag. This fix allows us to remove the weight restriction, but it doesn't solve all the seismic issues. It's a rehabilitation project, and it actually is funded under the state's rehabilitation program. So it's not a complete bridge rebuild. It's not a new bridge. It really is a maintenance rehabilitation, although somewhat significant rehabilitation project that allows just the posting to be removed. We do have the advantage of being able to, as Steve mentioned, address some of the non-motorized issues, implement some of the things that were identified in the bicycle master plan, create a safer pedestrian environment. One thing that we will be doing is changing the intersection at Bay, and if Steve, if you can pull that up, we'll actually be eliminating that left turn movement. That was permanently. And that was a requirement if we were going to have the space within the traveled way to accommodate the bicycle facilities. We took quite a bit of time reviewing that and analyzing that movement. It's a very low, it's a very infrequent movement. I think
I didn't realize there was a left turn there.
Yeah, I think the impact of it will be very minimal, but yet we get the benefit of adding bike lanes through there. So that's a good question. This is doesn't solve all the issues related to the bridge, but it does allow us to implement the truck route again, which is important. A couple other things, if I can, just mention. Steve talked a little bit about the throw fence. It's important to know that that is a requirement of doing this project. That was something that BNSF absolutely required of us. We wouldn't be able to move forward without some form of a throw fence. We knew that it would have an impact on some view corridors. It changes the way that looks there. So the thought was to put in a throw fence that would do the least amount to address the far views, the views of the waterfront. It is a fairly plain throw fence that it'll be black in color, and that's been identified as the least obtrusive when you're looking out, looking out over a view. We talked a lot about how this would work with the theming of the waterfront, and as we go and build waterfront infrastructure, it's likely that the bridge rails or handrails or other components of infrastructure along the waterfront will have a specific theme. This will be designed so that we can go back if needed in the future once we've identified a different look or feel for the area and replace this fairly simple, inexpensive throw fence at the time. So it's something we have to do, and we did it, we thought, in the most thoughtful way so that we could at least address it in the future if we need to in a different way.
Councilmember Lillquist.
Thanks. Let me continue. I have a few quibbly things I'll talk to you about afterwards with regard to the bike lane not protected and the nice protected island. But what I really wanted to talk about was the 6-month closure.
Sure.
I understand that you want to do a full closure, like with the James Street project, so you can work, more or less all the time rather than having to open and close. When we write this contract, are you considering anything like performance bonuses for timeliness and or penalties for delays that are, the contractor's responsibility, not delays that are not, they're doing? Are those sort of timeliness provisions written into the contract typically?
Yeah, so a couple things on the full closure. I mean, we definitely do everything we can to not close arterials. We understand that it's a significant impact on the traveling public, but we always look at it from a inconvenience versus the cost of construction. And in this case, we estimate around a $600,000 savings if we do a full closure. So it is significant in a project that's a little over $3 million if we can save that kind of money by doing a full closure. We will have in the contract some specifications in terms of the duration that the bridge can be fully closed, and at which time they would have to open it up to traffic at some point, recognizing that what goes hand in hand with that is the potential for weekend work or evening work, both of which the contractor, when they submit their schedule, will be able to request from us. So certainly we understand the impact of a full closure. We understand James Street going long has been problematic. And on the James Street contract, just to address that very quickly, certainly there's been weather delays, but at the same time, the working days allowed in the contractor is still within those working days. And so even though the original schedule submitted by the contractor said 6 months, because of the delays from not just cold, but rain, has a similar impact on structural concrete when they're pouring it, they're still within their working days. So that's always the balance when you put a project out for bid. If you constrain the amount of time that the contractor has to complete that, you certainly pay a premium for that. So when we put something out, it's a balance between inconvenience and cost. And so looking at this, one way to address and make for a shorter closure is to allow provisions to work evenings and night, multiple crews. And Steve, you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, the current contract that is out and is published involves a 6-month construction duration. The closure requirements are a subset of that. It's slightly less in terms of the actual closure days. We've put restrictions to require that the closure essentially be contiguous. We can't have multiple full closure durations, so we don't confuse the traveling public about the bridge, whether it's open or closed. And so there may be times beyond the full closure duration within the working day schedule that the contractor may opt to do some lane closures in order to finish up work off or around the bridge. So that we've certainly taken some lessons learned from the James Street project to incorporate into the current contract to minimize the impacts and minimize that duration.
I appreciate that, but it sounds like with James Street, we track actually working days, not calendar days, because of the things which may delay it beyond their control. Are we going to track working days on this project? And again, the question is, do we have bonuses and/or penalties with regard to the working day, provision?
We always have penalties.
Okay.
We always have liquidated damages, so if anyone extends beyond their allotted working days, there's a penalty for that. It's something that we can and have implemented in the past, and it's very clear in the contract. And it really all comes down to the number of working days you allow and the city's willingness to accommodate evening work and weekend work and those things. So like I said, it's a balance, and we understand that inconveniencing the public is something that we really work hard not to do. But major construction projects on arterial routes, there's going to be some amount of impact for sure. So we're definitely, as Steve said, we're looking at the contract language, looking at what's happened on James Street and trying to tighten that up so that we have a little bit more control over the length of the project and the Bay Chestnut Bridge project.
Great. Councilmember Boyce.
Steve, on Champion Street, the removal of that crosswalk, right there, how are people going to get from like Old Town Cafe over to Soy House then?
There is a crosswalk at both Maritime Heritage Park, which is to the left at Central, to allow them to get there, as well as at the top of Champion, which is a relatively short block. So essentially that crossing there will require a slight additional detour or pedestrian walk route if they're on that side of the street. The traffic or pedestrian traffic that might be coming up either Hawley or from Roeder and detoured at Central would presumably most likely already be on that side of the street to continue up Hawley Street. So it does require that. We just felt that from we're going to have a significant amount of detoured traffic that would normally use Roeder Chestnut turning left from this motion to avoid that that interaction with.
So will there be
cars.
special pedestrian signage?
Yeah,
to say that
all of these call-outs on this engineering drawing indicate a variety of signage. The orange is really orange safety fencing that will be up during the duration of construction to limit pedestrian movement through that zone.
Okay. And it looks like on these plans that there's concrete bulb outs that are going on with the new crosswalk or the temporary crosswalk. Is that true?
Those are temporary pedestrian ramps because the alignment of the current or the proposed temporary crosswalk revision does not occur where existing ramps are. So those will be, you're talking about on this particular,
Yes.
Yeah, those are ADA ramps. The project, due to federal funding, is required to be ADA compliant for both for pedestrian traffic during construction.
Okay. And then with the Upfront Theater, the access to their parking lot will be available at all times?
That is in the contract, yes. The access to all businesses is required by, at all times. Obviously, when you're essentially tearing up sidewalk immediately in front or doing a driveway entrance, there will be some temporary closures, but all notification will be required by the contractor, and the city will be taking a part in that to ensure that adequate notice is given for the few days that we will be working on their approach. Ted?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. There has been extensive outreach to all the businesses that'll be impacted by this closure. So Steve and other staff have gone out, met with the business owners. There's no doubt that there's an impact on some of them, but they're fully aware of the project. And as we mentioned on that specific example, anytime we can write something into the contract that allows access to remain, we're doing that. But we've really worked hard on making sure that they know the project is coming. And it's not just the businesses. We've worked with folks that are putting on events like the Bellingham Bay Marathon, Ski to Sea, folks that in the past have used that either as part of their race or certainly to get from one point to the other. They're aware of the project and will be able to make some arrangements because it will be closed during their event, most likely.
One thing that I'd like to say is in a previous life, I spent time on a construction team that did an overpass. That took 3 years versus 6 months. And one of the things that really helped us in that project was continual outreach with the Downtown Merchants Group. And so I just thought continual presence there could help with understanding about it and what the reroute is. And we even got some of the businesses to do table tents that showed what the routing was. So things like that can really help with the community outreach.
That's a good idea. Yeah, we'll make sure to work with both the neighborhood group and the downtown merchants. Yeah, thank you.
Councilmember Lillquist.
Thanks, Roxanne. One final question. I know that there's been several variations on plans for how Roeder Avenue might work, and some of those involved widening the road, creating approach lanes. As you say, this is just maintenance work on the deck to remove the load limit on it, not a real rehabilitation or full rehabilitation or replacement. But is there anything we're doing now that will make it either easier or more difficult to do any widening of that structure if we have to have approach lanes in the future? Are we affecting the future flexibility for Roeder, which is, northwest of this by, I don't know, about 150, 200 feet?
In terms of physical constraints that this project imposes on future work regarding to that, we're not, there isn't anything that would necessarily preclude that. I mean, the scope of the project is this rehabilitation. We are essentially leaving the existing structure for the most part intact. So if there is as part of the future waterfront work, proposed structural revisions to what the Roeder Avenue Bridge in blue here, those would largely be separated from the work that we're doing as part of this project. As far as that aspect.
Let me try to sharpen up. What I'm imagining is that if we did indeed have to widen that Roeder approach, it might involve cantilevering out to create a wider deck. And I don't know if that cantilevering, whatever it would be, would taper and be gone by the time you reach this bridge. And I don't know if adding those sort of extra supports will be easier or harder once we've hardened the deck and reinforced it. I want the Roeder Avenue project to not face any kind of difficulty. They seem pretty far away, but I just wanted to make sure that maybe that was thought about.
At this time, the Roeder Avenue widening is still in a concept phase. Essentially, the rehabilitation work that we're providing on this deck would not cause a detriment to widening it in the future. I wouldn't say it would be any easier or harder to do that work later. Yes.
Council members, any questions? Seeing none, this was for information only, so we thank the department for the information. Anything further, council members? Seeing nothing, end of committee.